All right, what's up, guys? Today we've got another early 90s horror movies you must watch top 5 list. This one is going to be the second edition of the unnecessary sequels. Of course, I say that in jest because I love these movies, and for me, they are absolutely necessary. And basically, again, just to kind of reiterate, these are 90s sequels to 80s franchises in a lot of cases, things that were put out just for the sake of capitalizing on the video store boom. I think in most cases they were direct-to-video, with a few exceptions maybe here and there. But yeah, mostly direct-to-video, early 90s, sequels to popular names from the 80s, basically. And so the first one I'm going to talk about is kind of one I'm just going to get out of the way a little bit. We've all heard of it. It's one of the most recognizable So Bad It's Good movies, and that is Troll 2. This was from Clive Anderson, aka Claudio Fragasso, the infamous Italian director. He also did Night Killer, a couple of the zombie sequels, and other stuff. And he's notorious for being very good at making very bad movies. And this one is no exception. It's probably the most popular So Bad It's Good movie ever. I think it's considered on a lot of lists to be the worst movie ever made. I would kind of disagree with that, but if you haven't seen it, I highly suggest it. It's really something. I think the worst thing this movie does is reflect badly on the original Troll, which is a sincerely fun and entertaining movie from the 80s, Empire Picture days. Charles Band and John Carl Buechler, really great movie. And this is not an actual sequel to it. This is an Italian sequel. And those guys didn't give a fuck. They would make whatever they wanted and name it whatever they wanted. And this is a perfect example of that. I do believe that there is also a Troll 3 and 4. I have not seen those, but I have heard they get farther and farther from the source material even than this one. This movie actually, despite being called Troll 2, doesn't have a single troll in it. It's about goblins who feed people green slime to turn them into plants so that they can eat them instead of just going out and eating plants for some reason. It's absurd. I have a pretty vivid memory of this movie scaring the shit out of me when I was a kid. Going back and watching this is always fun because it just kind of shows how naive a kid can be for a movie like this to actually scare me. It's got great bad acting, great bad effects. Sometimes you almost wonder if Claudio, because you always hear the stories of him sincerely backing up his work as actual genius work that is misinterpreted, and there's stories of him getting mad at conventions when people are laughing at his movies. You almost have to wonder, watching especially a movie like this, if he's not a little more aware of what he's doing. And if that's the case, he might be one of the best directors ever, because he is able to get just the absolute worst performances. His comedic timing in the editing and everything is so on point to be exactly what it's not supposed to be in the best way. It's kind of hard to describe. If you haven't seen it, go watch it for yourself. Trust me, you'll have a good time. All right, so the second movie I'm going to suggest is one of my personal favorites from my childhood, and that is Pet Sematary 2. This, kind of like Pumpkinhead 2, is an example of a movie I saw before the original. This is something that I believe I caught on cable TV. It stars, of course, a young Eddie Furlong. The weird thing about this movie, especially since it has the same director, Mary Lambert, is that for a lot of the movie, it hits the exact same beats as the first. A doctor coming into town. He has a very similar experience with somebody who dies, quite a few other things. The difference being that this is told through the perspective of his son instead of him and his son's best friend. The show stealer in this movie is 100% Clancy Brown. He's a great character actor who's done a lot of really fun roles, and this is probably my favorite of his. He plays the best friend's abusive stepdad who gets turned into a reanimated pet cemetery ghoul. He does a outstanding job. He's hilarious. He's creepy. He's great. The tone of this movie is kind of weird and bleak, but it's got a weird performance from Eddie Furlong that's very entertaining. It's got a lot of cool effects and moments in the movie that kind of carry it along. A lot of memorable stuff. And, you know, my opinion on it is probably improved a little bit by nostalgia. Not a better movie than the original by any means. That's a pretty bold claim. The original is a masterpiece, but this is a pretty fun sequel and one of my personal favorites from the 90s. All right, so next is a pretty infamous franchise, and I have a little rant about the franchise thing with this one. Sorry, but I have to. That is Amityville A New Generation. This also comes with a few other movies. There is Amityville The Evil Escapes, Amityville Dollhouse, and Amityville 92 It's About Time, which is one of the better subtitles of any movie because it is about time, and that's hilarious. But this is the 4 movies that are part of the Cursed Object quadrilogy. Now, my rant is that whenever you hear a lot of people talk about Amityville, they talk about how there's like 30 movies in the franchise. I've never heard anybody do this with any other franchise. There are only 10 movies in the Amityville franchise. The rest are knockoffs. I've never understood why so many people try to count the knockoffs as part of the franchise, but you hear it a lot more than you would think. It's just an absurd claim. It's like saying that Children of the Living Dead is officially part of the Romero zombie movies. You just don't do that. It bugs me. I'm sorry. I had to say it to get it out of the way. But these 4 movies are official Amityville movies. The basic concept is that after the events of the original 3 movies, things from the Amityville house started making their way into other houses, bringing evil with them. In one case, it's actually a loft full of pretentious art students. These movies are all a lot of fun. The ones I've seen, I haven't seen Evil Escapes, but A New Generation is very 90s aesthetically. It's the one that takes place in the loft full of art students. They're all very what you would expect from a loft full of pretentious art students. It's good stuff. They get a mirror from the Amityville house and evil shit starts happening. 92, a father has 2 kids and the stepmom, I believe, or maybe just girlfriend of the father, get a clock that takes over the house in a very hilarious way. And Dollhouse is about a dollhouse from the Amityville house that is gifted to a daughter. And again, evil comes with it. I believe Evil Escapes is about a lamp. And 3 of the 4 movies, and from what I've heard, the 4th, all have pretty entertaining stuff. They have a lot of good effects. Most of all, Dollhouse, in my opinion, that's probably the best of the 4. Highly recommend. They're incredibly entertaining. Dollhouse and 92 definitely being the best of the 3. All right, and the 3rd movie, or set of movies, because this actually involves 2, I believe is one everybody's going to be familiar with. It is Silent Night, Deadly Night 4 and 5. These movies involve Brian Usna, part 4 actually being directed by him, and part 5 being produced. These are actually, in my opinion, some of the best movies in the franchise. I mean, aside from 1 and 2, I put these 2 right up there with them. 3 actually being The Black Sheep. It has its moments and some redeeming aspects, but it's by far the worst. And 4 and 5 are definitely where it's at. They're both pretty insane, and they both take the franchise in a very vastly different direction. The first one is barely even a Christmas themed movie. They kind of wedge a couple things in here and there to technically make it fit, but it's mainly about a yuppie chick who gets involved with a coven of witches who summon bugs, and Clint Howard's in there as Ricky, but is it Ricky or a different Ricky? We don't know really, but he's kind of their thrall, and there's traditional, Brian Usna and Screaming Mad George body horror. It's amazing. A little slow, if I remember, but still very entertaining. And my personal favorite of the two, and sometimes I almost want to say one of my favorites of the franchise, is The Toy Maker. That's part 5. It is almost something you could categorize as a killer doll movie. It's in that same arena. It's about a toy maker named Joe Petto who has a son named Pino, and they run a shop and make toys that seem to be designed to kill people. It's crazy. The ending is batshit in the best way. This one is pretty notorious, I think, for having Mickey Rooney in it, who actually spoke out about the original Silent Night, Deadly Night, and then years later ends up in the 5th sequel. This one also has a few callbacks to part 4 that kind of tie those together. It also has an actor that pops up in a lot of 90s stuff. The kid who plays Pino, I know he was in Pumpkinhead and Society and probably a few more things. He's one of those guys that always sticks out to me when I see him. And I'm like, hey, it's Pino. But yeah, Christmas time classics. Shame they're not on Blu-ray. They deserve it. Right now, they're only available on this 3-disc set in full screen, pretty much VHS quality, along with part 3, Better Watch Out, which, you could throw in there. It's 89. It's got Bill Moseley. It kind of feels 90s, I guess. I'll just go ahead and lump it in there too. It's about Ricky from the second, who somehow over the years just started looking like Bill Moseley. He's got a fishbowl with his brain showing in it, and it's basically a road trip movie. Very odd. Not the greatest, but it does have its moments, and it's worth checking out too. So I'll just go ahead and lump that in there spontaneously. And the last one, I saved the best for last. This is actually one of my favorite movies from the 90s, hands down. It's easily my second favorite in this franchise, which is a franchise I think a lot of, and that is Return of the Living Dead 3. More Brian Usna. Produced and directed by him. It features special effects from Steve Johnson and Christopher Nelson, who you might know from the Thing with Two Heads podcast, also the guy who designs the new Michael Myers masks for the current Halloween trilogy. This is a pretty important movie to me. I mean, for one, the cover art. This is one of my favorite cover arts from the video store. And it's an example of what you see is actually what you get. You see Melinda Clarke, and she looks exactly like this in the movie. I remember staring at this and thinking this was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. She's like Freddy Krueger almost, with the blades on her fingers. She's got springs running through her arm and glass sticking out of her shoulder, almost like a spiked punk rock shoulder guard. Amazing character design. You just can't beat it. And another reason I love this movie so much is that the original Return of the Living Dead is very counterculture, punk rock centric. It's one of the first movies that at least I ever saw that didn't treat punks like cheesy goons who are villains. They were the protagonists in the movie. They're portrayed as people. The whole soundtrack is punk rock driven. It is a very pro counterculture movie. And this is the 90s equivalent of that. It starts getting closer into the angsty, grunge, disaffected trend that was going on in the 90s. And it very much feels like it has the same spirit. Whereas Return of the Living Dead 2, as much as I like it for what it is. It strayed from that, and I've always really loved how part 3 brings it back to that. And on top of that, again, you have amazing practical effects that go way over the top, as you usually do with a Brian Usna film. Again, as the title says, you should go watch all of these, but if you're only gonna watch one, make it Return of the Living Dead 3, because it's awesome. And there you go. That's my list. There are actually quite a few more in this unnecessary sequel category that I can hit, so I'm sure that'll come eventually. And there are some other categories I'm gonna hit. I'm already pretty sure I have the next one planned out, and it's really fun. But yeah, let me know if you've seen any of these, if you love any of these, if you plan to watch them. Stick around for the next one. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. And until next time.